Alright, so last Tuesday we went over Django templating, right? So last week we went over for loops, if statements, comments, passing data from our views to our templates. We went over creating templates, extending templates, how blocking works, how importing templates works, all of that stuff. So we've covered essentially what would be our V in our MVC architecture, right? So our view layer. Now, in Java or in JSF, the next step down from the view would be a managed bean, right? So this essentially web app view code model, right? However, in Django, we don't really do it through classes. We don't really even do it through, there's not really a coupling like that, right? So instead, what we call view functions. And a view function is just this right here. And this stuff falls kind of into the view tier of our MVC architecture, but it also serves a little bit as a controller tier as well, right? So in these views, this is how we're going to pass data from our front end to our back end and from our back end to our front end. So these view functions are serving two purposes. They're passing, like I said, they're passing data up, and then they're taking data in and then sending that to actual business logic to drive decisioning, data input, processing, etc. Right? So that's what I want to get into today is the next layer down a little bit, which is the views. Depending upon where we end up today, Thursday we'll go over actually writing some logic in Python and doing some hardcore processing. Next week we'll go over modeling in databases, and that leaves us, where does that leave us in the semester? Does anybody know the date on Thanksgiving? 23rd. Yeah, so next week we'll go over databases and modeling. The following week we have class Tuesday. That will be probably pretty short, question mark, since it's Thanksgiving week. Actually, because a lot of you guys are probably going home on that week, right? Okay. You'll be here? Well, I figured you'd be here. What was I going to say? And then, so that'll be Thanksgiving week, and then the last week we'll go over anything that was left. So, the assignments, I haven't posted them yet for your last assignment. Last assignment will be due Friday, December 1st. Yes?
Can you push this to our organization or whatever we have?
Yes. That is, actually, I'll do that right now. That was on my list as well. I just keep forgetting to do it. Let's see, so github.uc.edu. I think I even created a repo for it. I just never pushed it. I didn't even create a repo for it. All right. Nope. Okay, so now that repo lives in this guy right here, so IT4045-Django. So like I said, assignment will be due on December 1st, and I'll probably have that out there. I'll probably have it out Saturday, Sunday, something like that. We'll go over it real quick on Tuesday. There's not really going to be a lot to it, right? It's going to be just take everything you did in 1 and 2, condense it, and put it into assignment 3, right? So the little things that we spend a lot of time on in assignment 1, like the design, doesn't have to be pretty, it's got to be functional. The ORM and stuff in assignment 2, is a lot easier to do in Django. So instead of doing all this stuff and mapping and everything in Django, we just point everything to our data connection. We create our models that model the tables, and actually the model creation will drive the table creation, and you should be good to go. So let's jump into this. One thing I wanted to cover first is, and I did the same thing in Java. So everybody always wants to know, how do we authenticate into our application, right? So in Django, this is actually super easy in that it has a built-in, if I can fire it up, it actually has a built-in authentications framework in the Django web framework itself. So if I go into localhost on port 8000, but invalid filter test, line 738, that should be, fix that in a minute. So if we go into localhost/admin, that'll take us to this Django administration page. This is not enabled in every Django application by default. In order to enable it, there's a couple things that we need to do. So in settings, we have to come in here and we have to make sure that our installed apps includes Django contrib admin, and then for the other things we'll need to do Django contrib auth, Django contrib content types, and sessions. And so really what the Django admin does is it allows us to administer both users and groups. These are both built-in types in the Django framework, as well as any models that we've created in Django. So realistically, hypothetically, we can manage our entire database and add all of our new records through the Django administration, right? So if I come in here and I don't, so if we come in here, you can see we have one user. It has a username, an email address, first name, last name. So to add new users, we can create a user registration form, sure, and tie this in as, like, pull the data in, save the user objects, so on and so forth. But the easier thing to do, especially for managed sites, like say a site that you don't want anybody to be able to log in or create a registration to, like UC. Not everybody needs to be able to log into UC. We don't want the general public to be able to create a SIG+2. We do want somebody to be able to add, either in bulk or in an individual sense, new users to the app. So if I come in and I can add a new user. So once I've added a user, I can add some personal information. And so, basically what this breaks down to is these are all of the attributes that are on the user model class, right? So we remember what a model class is from our Java experiences, right? So a model class is a class that has attributes and has methods, but they're really just getter and setter methods. So everything that we see here, so username, password, first name, last name, email address, etc., is an attribute of the built-in Django user class. So we can also grant permissions based upon, and these are just booleans, based upon, again, attributes of a user class. So I could say this user is staff, this user is super user. I can add the user groups, and then later on in the application, I can actually restrict what this user can see and do, or what this user can create, modify, etc., by delegating groups. So I'm not going to add him to any groups. but I can also add in individual user permissions. So I can also create, what was I going to say? I can also create unique user permissions as well, right? So as you can see here, like generic Django project background. Can add background, can change background, can delete background. Well, what does that map to? That maps to our CRUD operations of our models, right? So in theory, I can come in and I can create a user and I can say, all right, this user can log into the admin site, but I only want this user to be able to edit background information. So I can select all three, or I can select I only want them to be able to add background information, right? Or candidates or career opportunities or whatever have you. So that is the Django admin site. And so I can save that and I can log out. And I can log in as the user I just created. So now I'm logged in as the user, but I don't have permission to view anything because I gave him staff access, but I didn't give him super user access like I have as an admin. And I didn't grant any explicit permissions. So now the question is, where do we take it from here? So we know that Django has built-in user functionalities. We know that to build a login page, we're going to have to create a login view and something to process that view, right? So if I come back into PyCharm, if I go into my login.html, there are a couple methods here. There are not a couple methods. There are, whoops. And actually, I believe we went over this last week. So I have a form that requires a CSRF token. And then I have just two form inputs, which is username and password. And then I have a submit button. So realistically, and then my action. My action, and this is what I wanted to get to, my action points to whatever named URL, whatever URL is named, authenticate. So I only have one individual app, which is my base app here. So if I go into urls.py, I can find authenticate. And you can see that authenticate points to views do login. Yep. Actually, I can even point that to. Actually, what I'll do is I'll get rid of this. So we'll scrap that. We'll want to point login to login, right? So if we go into views, there should be a function in here called login, which is right here. Now, what we were doing before is we were pointing the login page, we were mapping the login page to the login method or login view function, right? So login view function was just spitting back out the login page. So we had to actually navigate to a login page to be able to use it. But we know that Django has this ability to extend and inherit templates. So why don't we clean that up a little bit and drop the login, which has, if we look at login.html, it has a conditional, which is if logged in. It will change that to something more reflective of the current state of authentication. Why don't we drop login into our base.html, right? So if we remember from last week, for those of you guys that were here on Tuesday, we can have these blocks, these header blocks, And these footer blocks, or I'm sorry, we can include these header and footer files. So why not just include the login file as well? So now at the top, we're always going to include login.html, and depending upon whether a user is logged in or not, we will either be prompted to we'll either prompt them to log in or greet them, right? So depending upon if the user is logged in, we'll print their username. If the user is not logged in, we will print the login dialog. So we've done that. Let's go into index.html, and let's clean this up just a little bit. Oh. So if I save that, and I reload my home page. So if we recall, right, so now, and we need to reorganize this just a little bit. Let's see, footer.html, header.html. So now we display the login, we display the welcome message, and then we display, so we say welcome on here 3 times, which is way, way, way too much. But so since the user's logged in already, since the user is already logged in, we're getting the welcome Rick login message. Now, if I go back to the admin page, which is the only way I can do this for right now, and log out as Rick, now if I go back to my home page, now I'm getting welcome anonymous user because I'm just a random guest. But here's the thing. So if we go into our code and we look at the content of login right here, or I'm sorry, if we look at the content of login.html, this variable, this logged in variable, which we were passing in from the login method, right, which we're passing in as false, is never getting passed in. So it's always going to the else part of that conditional statement in login.html. So we're always going to print user. Now, user is, I bit the inside of my cheek. User is actually a built-in variable in Django that will always print the user that's currently logged in, right? So if we want to actually check if a user is logged in, all we should have to do is say if not user in the template and reload. At least I thought. That's right. If is authenticated. I think that's it. Okay, yeah. All right, so user is a built-in variable. However, it will always we have to actually do the check through the is authenticated function, right? So I can't just always assume that the user. What am I trying to say here? We can't always assume that the user is going to be none, because even if the user is not logged in, Django still has an anonymous user concept, right? So to just check to see if the user is none, it's going to fail. What we can do is we can check using user is authenticated or user is not authenticated, and conditionally show or hide this content and this content. So, excuse me. I built the login. The login works. We'll test it in a second. At least it should work. Let me see. Where do I pull the authenticate from? So let's add in one more form here. Form method equals post action equals logout URL logout CSRF token. I'll say button type equals submit logout. So reload one more time, and okay, so I still haven't logged in as a user. So if I hit login, now I'm just taking a login. Or I'm taken to, I'm taken to login here. So why am I seeing login.html instead of the home page with the login? This is because we haven't filled out the login view yet, right? So if I come up here and I do an import statement, and I believe it's from Django.apps. Django, I think it was core maybe. Okay, cool. At least I think that's it. Just looking at my notes here to make sure I'm pulling in the right thing. Okay, I screwed up here. So it's Django contrib auth import authenticate login. Okay, so in my login method, what needs to happen here? So I need to log in to the Django framework itself. I need to confirm that the login was successful. I need to send some kind of error, some kind of message back to the end user, which I can automate and we'll get into later on. So I need to have some kind of message that'll throw back, and then I need to do something assuming the login was successful. So the quick and dirty here is to do this, right? So if I can say if authenticate username equals request.post request.post, and I think, what did we call that? Username? Yeah. Get so request is this HTTP request object, and this has attributes for post and get and put. It has attributes for file as well, and really what this does is this allows us to access anything passed into the form. So what we're doing is we're accessing the post data, and then the post data is actually coming as a big dictionary. So we call the get method to get the value stored in username and password and pass it to this authenticate framework. And what authenticate will do is authenticate will tell us whether the user logged in, or I'm sorry, whether the username password combination provided is accurate, is correct, and if it is, what we can do, what it will do is return the user object. If it's not accurate, it returns none, causing this if statement to fail, which is where we'll put our fallback. So what we can do is we can say if user, and then we'll say login request user. And then up here we'll say quarks. So on line 35, I've created this variable called quarks, or keyword arguments. And if we look from our other, if we look at our other views, you can see we do pass back these keyword arguments, right? So look at index. We pass back as a third argument to render keyword arguments. And this is just, like I said last week, this is just the name of the variable as it will appear in the template and the value stored in that variable. So what I can do is I'll pass in keyword arguments that will, I'll create keyword arguments up here, and I can pass in any error message that I need to pass in via the keyword arguments, right? So I can say error equals actually I probably want to leave that as an empty string. So if I'm able to log in, I don't pass any arguments in, or I don't update the keyword arguments. If it fails, I pass into quarks error right? So I've made all of my changes to my code. I'll bounce the server. And now if I go back to my home page and I log in takes exactly one argument, 2 given. It's weird. Let's do this. So make it so much easier to box grab Python. Django project host. Oh, Java Django support for this project. Django support project root. So right here, what I'm doing is I'm just creating a run configuration in PyCharm for Django, so I can debug this.
Do you already have your database set up and everything, or I'm confused where the data is being saved?
So, yeah, so as part of,
Or is it that storage DB that's in the root?
yeah, it's that storage DB that's in root, right?
That's in every project?
Yeah, so if you clone mine or fork off of mine, yeah, storage DB is in every project. And actually,
Is set up to handle user and everything?
yeah, so when you build your Django database, and I'll go over this next week, But when you build a database in Django, when you do a Python manage.py syncdb, it creates all of those tables for you. So it'll create any backing tables that it needs. Out of the box, Django requires you to have a database connection set up somewhere to store its data. So, whereas with like JSF or Flask or another framework, I can start doing all kinds of stuff without even having a data connection. I can dump it to CSV and the framework doesn't care. Django does. So, let's see here. Why are you still choking? I enabled Django support for this project. Okay, so that's right. I see the problem here. Delete this here. Okay, so now we should be good. So now I can debug it. Debug. Okay, what's incorrect about the environment? Okay, so that's right. T4045 app. So what we're doing here is we're specifying the Django settings module, and this is just telling the debugger inside of our project which Django app, which, like I said, we have a bottom level project structure or bottom level project directory, and then inside of that are these individual Django apps, right? So one is called IT4045 app, another one could be called auth, another one could be called shopping, another one could be called cars, whatever have you. It's however you want to break apart and compartmentalize your code. So I hit OK, and I don't know why this guy is still apply, debug. All right, now we should be good. Okay, so now we're debugging. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back into views.py. We're going to drop a breakpoint here, and we're going to do the login. We're going to say admin. So you can see the request that we got is called a WSGI request, or it's of type WSGI request, and WSGI stands for Web Server Gateway Interface, and that's just the built-in web server, if you will, that comes out of the box with all of the Django stuff. You do have to do some weird WSGI configuration when you start running this behind, like Nginx or Apache or an actual enterprise web server. But as it sits, we don't care too much about that as it sits today. So we're going to go ahead and start stepping through this. Okay, so an exception was thrown. No such table auth user. Python manage.py sync. Okay, so let's try this now. So let's try this. So this is the one downside about Django doing all of this stuff for you automatically, right? Is Django's creating a lot of tables in the background that you're not entirely sure what they are. I mean, you know what that's a really bad way to say it. You know what they are, but it's hard to remember what's actually been done since it's all being automated for you, right? If I went in and created every table by myself, I would know, all right, auth user was created, this was created, that was created. Whereas since Django's doing it for me, I can assume that maybe all of the tables I need got created, but I'm not entirely sure. By all migrations, operations to perform. Let's see, so where am I at? My views. No such table auth user. All right, so let's do this. We'll kill this. Manage.py flush. So I went ahead and I blew away all the data in storage.db. Now, one thing that we can do to actually identify what's been created and what has not been created is we can go to View, Tool Windows, Database, and I can just hit New Data Source, and I can hit SQLite. Just serial should be fine. We'll call it IT4045. So I point it to the database file that I want to use, which is inside of /PyCharm projects, inside of IT4045 app, storage.db, and then I can just drop in the driver file as well, which is included in the project. So I do that, I hit apply, I hit OK. So now you can see I'm connected to IT44, I'm connected to storage.db, and you can see auth user is a table on this in this schema. So if I go into table editor, I can look inside, I can see, all right, so I have a user myself, which means that now if I close the connection, so I close the connection in the database, close the table editor, and now I come in here and I fire back up my Django server, and I plug in the password, and I hit login. We're still, what the hell? No such table auth user, but auth user exists. That's weird. Yeah, we literally just looked at it. Auth user exists right here, right? Yeah, that's it. Let's see here. That's really weird. Django. Okay, so let's do this. T4045 app models. Let's hide that. Get out of there. Go on. Admin.py. See if it chokes this time. No such table auth user, but so just for sanity, let's say admin. Okay, so something is configured incorrectly. Settings.py. So we have one databases. So I wonder, this must be pointing to something. This must be pointing to something different. So, that's weird. So let's do Python. Just for sanity's sake here, let's try this. Okay, so now we can log in using. So now we can actually log into the site using. Okay, so now we're gonna make something entirely different here. Yeah, I know the problem. All right. Okay, so let's do this. Let's just create an entirely new Django server here and call it IT4045. Python interpreter, IT4045 app, interpreter options, yada 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 yada. Hit OK, hit apply, and we run it. IT4045 app. Okay, so we're still getting that same error, but okay, that is really weird. So when we run it through the command line, we don't get this error. We do get this error when we run it through the debugger. That's really weird. So I guess we're just not going to run it through the debugger today. So we'll go back to command line and do also update this. Whoops. And log out method as well. Def. So the error that we were getting about the name resolution with logout, that's because we hadn't specified a URL named logout yet. And in order to specify a URL named logout, we also have to create a view function named logout. So I've just stubbed in the logout view function, saved it, saved my urls.py. I rerun the server, and assuming everything was done right, So now we're logged in, and now I can go home, and now I can log out. And we get an error because it didn't do anything, because we have it stubbed in. But if I do this, I go into admin, and I do my logout. So now I'm logged out of the Django app. So now if I use the login screen on the main page, and I hit login, so it looks like we got a 200. Oops. Okay, so now we're back to the error that we were getting, right? So if we look, and we look on line 38 of views.py, what are we doing on line 38? We're doing login. So the question is, I would assume that we're not getting a user object back from authenticate. So let's take a look at our login HTML. So username is right, password is right. This is where it would really help to be able to do the debugger. So let's do this. Let's do print request.post. Just to confirm, we are using post, right? Okay, so just to confirm that we're not crazy here. Cord is already in use. PS aux grep python kill -9 14509. So that just means send it a sig kill. So kill it right this second. Like don't wait for a response. Don't just kill it. So take the process and execute it basically. Not execute in a deadly way, not like a run way. So now we've killed it. So now we'll rerun our server again. We'll go back here. We will do the login page again. We'll plug in admin and the admin password and hit login. So now we know we're using login incorrectly. But let's think about this for a second. What could we be screwing up here? So we want to use the framework built-in login method function, but we're getting an error. What could be happening here? Anybody paying enough attention to catch on to what's happening here?
You're passing in 2 arguments and it takes 1.
So close. So what method am I working inside of, or what function am I working inside of right now?
Inside the login function, then you're calling it again.
Exactly.
And then you're trying to get 2 parameters when there's 1 that it wants.
So this is actually not the login function that I want to call. I want to call the built-in framework login function, but instead it's resolving to this function right here, which takes request. Because remember, Python, you can call a function in Python without associating it with a class. Right? So in Java, I could have 100 different login methods that all take different parameters. Whereas here, I have to uniquely identify, all right, I'm going to use login, but I'm going to have to call it, I'll have to say as do login. And then if I come down here to my login, I could say do login. And now, so I can also do named imports in Python. So when I imported login, I can specify as do login or as as authenticate, whatever I want to call it, and actually have that imported into my file as a totally different name. So I can avoid the issue that we just saw with this function confusion by just doing something like that. Or I could have renamed my view function to not login. That would have been an option as well. but I decided to take the more complicated approach. So now we reload again. Do login takes exactly one. Son of a gun. See the problem? So I called it do login. I still have a view function called do login. Alright. So now we'll go back here, resubmit the form. Now we're able to log in. So, took us a little bit of time, but it's there. Now, for those of you guys that were here last week or the week before, I talked about how we definitely want to make sure we separate out the layers of our application into not separate files per se, but into separate sections, right? So in the view, I never want to be doing realistically any kind of logic, right? So what am I doing in this view right here with login? I'm doing logic. So what can I do to make this a little more kosher for an MVC architecture? Yeah, so I can create a excuse me. I can create a, we'll call it auth functions, and then I can create a method or a function that will take my params. I think that's all we need actually. Yeah, it should just be params. And then we'll actually return a render, right? So we can even call our render function, which is basically returning an HTTP response, so we can return the render back to this login method, and realistically, all we will be returning in this function will be return, and if I do the import right, import do auth. Return do auth request.post. Right? So now, if I come into do auth, whoops, I line up all of my stuff here, and then I import render. Then I got to pull in this authenticate. And I got to pull in this stuff too. And then I just say params, and shoot, can't do that. I just don't want to do that, but I'll just say request. So what I can do is I can even pass all the way down to this function my request object and do all of my logic separately. So now I can just say so now I'm passing my entire render, like all of my render, and I'm doing all of my login in a separate file. So if I go to the view, all I'm doing is I'm calling function. So there's no logic in my view, really any of my view functionality. I mean, there's some logic in the templates, but in the view function, we really want to avoid logic in the view functions. So I save it. If I go back to my main page and I go to admin, since I haven't built in the ability to log out yet, log out, and then I go to my home page and I hit admin and plug in my password. Now I'm able to log in, which called the separate file. So now I have the separation of business logic, if you will, which is an authentication piece, just like we did in JSF. Remember, in JSF, we went down to the DTO layer, or we went down to the DTO class. So we used the DTO class to basically, we took in a request that came in through the managed bean, passed that to a service layer, which called upon DAO, user DAO, which utilized user DTO to pull the user out and identify whether the data passed in is a valid user or not, and then return that response back to the top. So since this is Python, it's a little bit easier than that. Now we just call auth functions, do auth, and just return the value from that. So when we get into other models and other ORM stuff, we'll want to separate out more. We'll want to separate out a little bit more, kind of. But for right now, what we've done is pretty good. So real quick, let's wire up this log out functionality, and then we'll be out of here. So we have a log in, but we don't have a log out yet. Right? So since I have moved my login and logout functionality into a different file, I can go as far as to take this import statement completely out from this file. So now I could actually have a login and logout method will return do logout request. So if I go in auth functions, now I'll write my do logout function. And then we'll just pass in so that's my logout. So now I should have, after I update my import, so now I should have a working login and logout functionality, right? So if I navigate back to this guy, didn't return an HTTP response object, returned none instead. Let's see what happened here. Okay, logout. Views logout didn't return. Return do logout. Let's see. Do logout. Do logout. HTTP response. Okay, so you'll notice I'm pulling in the HTTP response redirect, and what HTTP response redirect does is, if we go into do logout, and actually what we can do is we can just do that, and then we'll come in here and we'll just say do logout request return HTTP response redirect index. So now if I return, logout index. So what HTTP response redirect does is it basically redirects us to a page on the site. Now Thursday I'll talk about, we can actually use the named URLs for this as well. So we can just do a reverse lookup and just go back to index, and instead of having to pass in the hard-coded URL, we just pass in the name, and assuming the name never changes, then we don't have to remember the actual URL. But So now we have a log out. Admin, password. So we're able to log in, we're able to log out successfully. We're conditionally showing and hiding the login form and the welcome page based upon the built-in authentication framework. But biggest takeaway here is that because we're using Django, we didn't have to actually write any of the login functionality. Right? We didn't have to code the checks or anything like that. That's all there for us. We just have to pull in the functions and place them where we need to place them. So, any questions about Django, logins, separation of views and business logic? Yeah, they're all going to go up today. I'm a little behind on them, but yeah, they'll all go up today.
Repo did not push. It's created, but
Let's see here. That's weird. Let me see here, dash V. Okay, so, okay. rm dash rf. So rm dash rf dot get. Yeah, so you do, but I forgot this already had a Git repo in it. So what I pushed and I committed, all I was doing was pushing to the repo that it came from, which is my personal GitHub. So now if I do git add, git commit, loads. Okay, so now the code's up there. So, any other questions? So, all right, we'll see you guys Thursday. No, I was not. I was actually hoping to talk to you after class. I would just do this. So, I'm having a lot of issues trying to get it working. Since this is our last Java assignment, do what you can with it, and then just submit what you got, and I'll just take that into consideration. So I would say just scrap the Hibernate stuff and just finish up the rest of it so like your course is running.
The course is running, but you told me that's supposed to be saved to me.
Yeah, so that's part of the thing, right? So, because when I tried to do that on mine, it actually wrecked my Hibernate, my Maven environment. So, that to be said, I don't know what's wrong with it, but it's pretty crazy. So just do what you can with it. Just like by this weekend, just clean it up as best you can. Just assume I won't grade you on the Hibernate stuff just because it's that I don't know what is wrong with it, but it's seriously wrong. So just do what you can with it, and then just let me know when you turn it in, and I'll grade you on everything else except for the Hibernate stuff. So just because it's a lot. If we were doing more Java for the class, I would be more adamant about you fixing it. But since that's the last Java assignment, I really don't care that much. So you got the general concept. Still build out your DTO stuff, all right? So still build out the classes. Still build them out as you would use them. Like you can get rid of the DAO class, but like still build out your remaining DTO classes and stuff. But you could forget actually using that. Does that make sense? So then just let me know when you're done.
Okay.
So just take your time, like by this weekend, Monday,